Hey, good afternoon. It's Peter Erskine here from New York. I would tell you what happened on yesterday's show, but it had nothing to do with today's show, so I won't tell you what happened there. And it wasn't yesterday, it was on Monday. But today is Lunch with Pete, the why, how, when, where, what, who of Part 74 licensing. And we have Henry Cohen from CP Communications and Gary Trenda from Professional Wireless. And they know everything there is to know about what I'm sure you've lost sleep about for years. Exactly. So Mac, just tell them a little bit about doing questions and then we'll get started.
Okay, well, over on the usually left-hand side of your screen, you'll see the Go to Webinar control panel. About halfway down, there's a little pull-down tab that says Questions. In there, you enter your questions. We will see the questions. The rest of the attendees will not see your questions. The only time they'll see them is if we answer them in that box and respond to all, but we don't usually do that. We respond on screen as part of the webinar, in which case you'll all hear it. Try to keep on topic, and that's about it on questions.
In the handout section, which I'm trying to load right now and not having much luck with, there is a PDF of this same PowerPoint deck that you will see shortly. And it will also be available to download along with the video starting tomorrow or so. So Gary, let me switch it over to you and you can do your thing here.
Okay.
All I have to do is get this, there's way too many people logged on. Where are all you people doing it? Don't you have anything to do this afternoon? Okay, there you go. Take it away, Gary.
Okay, so are you seeing my slides?
Not quite yet. We just got white right now.
Okay.
There we go. Now we got you.
There we go with that. Okay. So Part 74 licensing explained. So we're not really going to walk you through the FCC Form 601 today, but we'll talk about what is a Part 74 license for a low power auxiliary station and some of the FCC rules related to operation there. I think there's a lot of folks that we get a lot of questions about what's the difference between a Part 15 wireless microphone and a Part 74 wireless microphone, and what do I need a license for, what don't I need a license for, and that sort of thing. So we'll try and run you through those things today. I am joined by Henry Cohen, who is the Senior RF Systems Design Engineer and Head of Spectrum Affairs for CP Communications. For anybody that doesn't know me, I'm Gary. I work for PWS as an applications engineer. And I think Henry's going to start us out with a general outline of what we're covering in our Part 74 Explained presentation today.
Thank you, Gary. Thank you to everyone joining us. So here to discuss Part 74, the outline is going to consist of the following. Number one, we're going to explain what is Part 74. You've probably heard that term a lot. We'll explain exactly what that is. Why get a license? Why get a Part 74 license? Who is eligible for a Part 74 license? The requirements in order to get one, as well as operating under Part 74. And I'd like to point out that in order to get a license, you actually have to be familiar with the rules, just like getting a driver's license. You're supposed to demonstrate a familiarity with the DMV rules and regulations. Same thing with FCC licenses. You're supposed to understand as well as abide by them. So we're going to start out with what is Part 74, and in that we can see Part 74 is actually one small subsection, subpart of the overall Code of Federal Regulations. Code of Federal Regulations are exactly what it sounds like. These are all the codified laws and regulations that the Congress and the House and the Senate passed. Title 47 is that which deals with telecommunication. So Gary, are you going to advance?
Yeah, we'll go into what is Part 74.
Okay. So Title 47 deals with telecommunications. Within Title 47, there are several chapters. Chapter I deals with the Federal Communications Commission. Subchapter C in that chapter is broadcast radio services. And digging further down, we come into Part 74, which deals with various services: experimental radio, auxiliary, special broadcast, and other program distribution services. And Part 74 is broken down into several subparts. And the part that really is relevant to us is Subpart H, low power auxiliary stations. And we'll call this for short Part 74H or LPAS. And that's the meat of what we're going to be discussing today. If you'd actually like to see and read all of Part 74, that long link takes you right to the Code of Federal Regulations to Part 74. And you can read all about Part 74, including all the other subparts which have to deal with STLs, remote pickup, and other broadcast auxiliary services.
Henry, excuse me, can you lean into the mic a little bit? You're a little soft again.
Okay, sorry about that. I was getting a little too comfortable. All right, Gary. Yeah, thanks.
Okay.
So Part 74, Gary, do you want to take it from here, or do you want me to continue?
Yeah, sure. So we're going to kind of highlight a few things from Part 74 that are important to know. I mean, like we said, we're not going to read you all of the Part 74 rules, but go through and highlight a couple of things. So when you see on the top of these slides, you know, the 47 CFR Part 74, Chapter I, Subchapter C, Part 74, like that'll give you a good reference of where we are in the regulations. And anytime you see this kind of double S 74.1, that's where you could look it up if you're going to go to that link. And if you want to read through some of the additional details here, go right ahead. We'll try not to bore you to death with it. So rules for this part, we can talk about the scope, 74.1. An important thing we want to highlight here is 74.1 under B, where it talks about low power auxiliary stations, subpart H. So that is an important part of rules of Part 74, which apply exclusively to a particular service, constrained in that service subpart. So again, where do we get low power auxiliary station subpart H? It's part of the scope of 74. And then as we start going through the general rules, a couple of things we wanted to highlight here was 74.23. So we talk about interference, and we've heard us talk about T-Band radio on other webinars. And so this is one thing we want to highlight is that there are rules covering any interference from systems that you're operating with other systems that are for life safety, protection of property. Public safety radio here, T-Band radio, is something that you want to think about in that area. So here's what 74.23 says about interference jeopardizing safety of life or property or protection of property. And again, we're highlighting that radio communications involving the life safety or protection of property shall promptly eliminate the interference. So it's basically saying don't operate in an area where there are life safety operations. And if you're causing harmful interference, you as the user are responsible to eliminate that interference with the other licensed user. I don't know, Henry, is there anything you want to add to that?
I think what we'll explain in a couple of slides further down is the reason that we should basically just avoid any TV channel which is designated as a land mobile radio public safety channel is that those radio systems operate on 12.5 kilohertz wide channels and 25 kilohertz wide channels. And they are generally stacked every 12.5 or 25 kilohertz based on the market and the spacing of the systems. Wireless microphones and in-ear monitors and IFBs and intercom are typically a 200 kilohertz wide licensed bandwidth with a typical occupied channel bandwidth of about 100 kilohertz. There's essentially no way to avoid stepping on a land mobile radio channel using a wireless microphone. So therefore, it is best just to avoid completely any T-band public safety channels.
Yeah, and like you said, we're going to have some additional information about that later.
The other part about that, channel 14, 13, 14, 15, is it, or 14, 15, 16?
It's based on the market. So in New York City, it's 14, 15, and 16.
Well, the other thing about it is those frequencies could be mobile. And so you don't know if somebody's going to step on top of you if you put a wireless mic down in that area. And it's not a very reliable frequency coordination if you do that, even if you do find a nice clean space.
Yeah,
so it's better to just totally stay away from it.
The important thing to note is that it's a specific TV channel or set of TV channels in the different markets. So
Right.
You'll be in a market that might have 2 TV channels reserved for T-band radio for public safety, and you need to avoid all 12 meg of those 2 TV channels because you don't know where specifically within that channel a two-way radio is going to be operating, is what you're saying, right?
And is there a list somewhere of by market, what channels? Where would they look that up?
Yes, yes. So in Part 90, it lists all the T-band markets, and I believe on one of the other coordination webinars, there was a slide which showed the T-band markets.
Does IAS automatically mark those off depending on the zip code you put in?
Yeah, that information is in the IAS database, and so it'll actually show up as not a TV channel, but it'll show up as an area where red, meaning that it's not in your active bandwidth.
Right.
And I believe Wireless Workbench does the same.
Right. Yeah, and the slide deck from the IAS presentation had a list of all those markets and those TV channels.
And let me go back to something Pete says. It's not just that the high-powered land mobile radio can interfere with your operations. It certainly can. But it is actually possible for wireless microphone type operations to interfere with receive sites on these land mobile radio systems because they're for wide area, typically a metropolitan area. They have remote receive sites all over the place as well as remote transmit sites. And these sites are rather sensitive. And if you're operating a couple of 250 milliwatt IFBs, you could desense a receive site and you could actually cause interference and prevent a field unit, an EMS team, calling in asking for backup or calling in asking for additional resources. And that's that's really putting life and safety in jeopardy.
Right. Yeah, and this applies to people operating under Part 15 or Part 74 rules, really, that the interfering with T-band radio is a major thing to be aware of. You want to avoid T-band radio.
And having a Part 74 license does nothing to allow you to be down there.
No, I mean, yeah, if it's a T-band, if it's a channel reserved for T-band radio, you're not allowed to operate there.
Well, here's where we get into the finer points of the licensing. There's nothing which explicitly prohibits you from operating in a land mobile radio designated T-band channel. But because of the non-interference mandate that we saw in the previous slide, and because of the nature of the 2 kinds of services, it's virtually impossible for a wireless microphone not to be stepping on a land mobile radio channel. So therefore, you shouldn't operate there.
Yeah, kind of to your point of the wireless microphones or in your monitor systems have a much wider modulation. And so your single IAM could be stepping on several land mobile radio channels.
Correct.
Okay, so Part 74, other things to highlight that we'll go over a little bit. 803, frequency selection to avoid interference, and 832, licensing requirements and procedures. And so we'll have some additional information on that as we go through. And then 861, which is your technical requirements. So we'll talk a little bit about technical requirements while we're here. So transmit power and carrier power is something you hear people talk about a fair bit when we're talking about Part 74, and Henry will go into this with why do you want to get a Part 74 license. There are different rules in Part 15 versus rules in Part 74 as far as power levels. And so if you're operating under Part 15, you may have a limit of 50 milliwatts, where if you're operating under Part 74, you might have a limit of 250 milliwatts. We're also highlighting in here that you'll operate sufficiently within the authorized frequency band edges to ensure the emissions bandwidth falls entirely within the authorized band. So this is the answer to the question we get sometimes about, well, this says it tunes from 470 to 698. Like, why is my first frequency 470.125, for example? And that would be so that your emissions bandwidth falls within your authorized transmit band. Also, we're highlighting here that the auxiliary station, which when we say auxiliary station during this, what we mean is a microphone transmitter, an IEM transmitter, some low power transmitter. So the low power auxiliary station shall be operated so that no harmful interference is caused to any other class of station operating in accordance with the rules. So this is kind of, as Henry was talking about before, when we're talking about hierarchy, if you're operating inside of a digital television channel, the digital television channel is the primary operator there, and you're secondary to that service. And then an unlicensed system might be secondary then to your service. So that you want to understand the hierarchy that we're talking about there with the rules.
We're also secondary to land mobile radio that's designated for T-band markets.
Yes. All right, which gets into Henry's part of why do you want to get a Part 74 license?
So for those of you who qualify, and we'll certainly get into that as well, why get the Part 74 license? Why go through all of that? Why learn the rules, and why adhere to a set of workflows that might be inconvenient? Well, there are several advantages, especially if you are doing this for a living, if you are providing wireless microphones or coordination services for a living. First and foremost is that you have priority over and protection from unlicensed, non-licensed Part 15 users. So those users can be unlicensed wireless microphones and white space devices. And although we still haven't seen a lot of white space devices in the marketplace yet, we do see a few. They're mostly fixed installs at this point. But the white space proponents are pushing and pushing and pushing. Anybody who's following the Microsoft docket is probably well aware that Microsoft is pushing very hard for white space devices, not only in the TV bands, but in other bands as well. So getting a Part 74 license will allow you to register in the white space database to gain protection from white space devices. And remember that the white space database is not necessarily assigning you a channel, rather it removes a TV channel from the available pool that the white space device can draw upon. And registering in that database is going to be key to protecting your event or your ongoing operations from the unlicensed devices. Unlicensed wireless microphones are also mandated to now register in the white space database as an unlicensed device and manually request a frequency from, or frequencies. So the unlicensed wireless microphones, in theory, cannot operate in any TV channel that a licensed wireless microphone user has removed from the pool of available channels for unlicensed devices. In reality, the workflow will be whatever the event coordinator permits, or the FCC designated coordinator for an event. So this is one key aspect to the advantages of a Part 74 license.
Henry, can you talk a little bit about the existing white space databases and kind of the changes that are happening there?
Sure. So right now, there is only one database operation, database administrator, Nominet, based out of the UK, which seems to have a working, albeit a minimally effective one, but has a portal for licensed incumbents, Part 74 users, both Part 74H and Part 74G remote pickup users, to register operations in and reserve a TV channel, or remove that TV channel from the pool available to unlicensed devices. There is quite an issue with the whitespace database ecosystem not really functioning, not really in the operational manner that the FCC probably envisioned. At this point, it's a flux. A number of comments have been entered in recent proceedings with FCC comments about the lack of a truly functioning whitespace database ecosystem. So in the meantime, you've got this one database, Nominet, in which to register. We seem to believe it's working. You don't really get much of a confirmation to that. And to check whether your registration has taken, you have to go in, dig further into their website and check their database file, which is just a raw CSV, and see if your entry registered. But we have no idea if it goes to any of the other databases which are operating purely for the purpose of controlling whitespace devices. So it's a very nebulous and tenuous situation right now with the databases. But we do expect that to be corrected, or hopefully within certainly in an amount of time prior to massive introduction of additional whitespace devices in the core TV band. The next reason to get a Part 74 license is it gives you the ability to operate at higher power levels in the UHF TV band. Part 74 wireless microphones in the UHF TV band below 608 are limited to 50 milliwatts. Licensed users are available, can operate at up to 250 milliwatts. We as coordinators generally don't permit that. It has its place, and when you need it, you need it. But certainly the ability to operate at 100 milliwatts, which is a common occurrence, especially for in-ear monitors, you can't do legally with Part 15. You can only do legally if you have a Part 74 license. The last reason is it gives you, well, not the last reason, sorry, we have some more. The next reason is the ability to use equipment that has been certified under Part 74H and is restricted to users who hold a license under Part 74. And basically what this means is any piece of equipment that can operate at power levels that exceed that enumerated in Part 15, basically 50 milliwatts in the core TV bands, has been certified under Part 74 rules by the FCC in equipment authorizations, and only Part 74 license holders can operate. So here's a perfect example. For those of you who own Shure PSM 1000s, a device which can go to 100 milliwatts, the PSM 1000 is a Part 74 certificated piece of equipment. You don't hold a Part 74 license, or your company that you work for doesn't hold a Part 74 license. You're not legally allowed to operate that piece of equipment, even though you may have it turned down to 20 milliwatts or turned down to 50 milliwatts. The piece of equipment is certified under Part 74, and it is restricted to use by Part 74 license holders. So that's something to keep in mind. The other reason for Part 74 is it allows you access to bands which Part 15 users don't have access to. And some of those bands are those which are either not in service yet, there's no equipment available yet to Part 15 users, and there's others which are, Part 74 users, and there's other bands where the equipment actually, most manufacturers will not sell it to non-Part 74 licensees. So for instance, we have the 950 STL band, 941 to 960. That band, Gary, would you go to slide 14 for a second?
Sure.
Yeah. So if we look, the ability to use bands reserved for licensed users only, Part 74.802. 950 megahertz STL band, 941 to 960. Only licensed users have access to that band. Any equipment that can access that band has been certificated under Part 74. The 1.4 gigahertz AFTRAC band, 1435 to 1525. You've probably heard about this. Negotiations are still going on with AFTRAC on the best way to automate the permissions system for this. But that band will only be permissible to use by Part 74 license holders. And again, that equipment will be certificated under Part 74. Same thing with the 6 gig broadcast auxiliary service band. It's a 7 gig band, which is 6875 to 7125 as part of the BAS band, but it's broken up into 2 sections as far as wireless microphone users go. Again, there's no equipment available in this band yet as an off-the-shelf product, but when it does become available, it will be certified under Part 74, and only Part 74 users can use it. The last reason is to simply be a good RF citizen. It increases the awareness of professionalism and the users and operators of this equipment. In order to get a Part 74, you are in theory supposed to know and understand and abide by the rules to operate. And it also is reinforcing to both the FCC and those unlicensed device proponents, the white space devices, and other services that are looking to come in, such as Internet of Things proponents. The importance and the rather large population of Part 74 wireless microphone users, that we are a vital and vibrant community of users creating probably 99% of the content consumed either live or through some kind of recorded or streamed format.
Henry, we've got a couple of questions coming in. One from Kenneth Goodwin about, as a rental shop, if the sound company has a Part 74 license, but you rent wireless to other users, what does that mean for Part 74 versus Part 15 operation?
So one of the stipulations of any license for any service, as well as Part 74, is that the licensee always maintains command and control over their transmission equipment. Now, arguably, that is somewhat difficult to do if you're doing a black box rental. It's very difficult for you to maintain control over that user. You can certainly email them, call them on their mobile, but if they ignore you or don't answer you or simply refuse, you no longer have command and control over that equipment. Now, first and foremost, the FCC goes after the person with direct control on the equipment. So if for some reason they were creating interference, let's say to a public safety user, and they were there for a while, and the gentleman in the black van with the antennas on top were able to actually visit you or visit your client, they would be the ones to get the notice of violation, the field ticket. It might possibly come back to you, though, because you are the licensed user of that equipment, and you potentially provided equipment that can only be operated by a Part 74 user to a non-Part 74 license holder. It's a gray area. I'm not aware of any notice of violations that got back to the owner of the equipment. And in fact, I'm not really aware of any violations or interference complaints against wireless microphone users within the past 15 to 20 years. We've looked that up as part of the campaign to increase the wireless microphone Part 74 eligibility over the past few years, and we've not actually been able to find any violations by users who would have been considered professional users.
Yeah, and I think that definitely ties into your be a good RF citizen. You know, if you're a professional shop and you're providing this equipment, in most cases, you're going to be providing some sort of frequency coordination with it. And so having the person that you're renting equipment on, advising them on what frequencies that they can operate on that won't cause interference is a good place to start, because most of the enforcement action is going to be complaint based or based on interference being caused with another licensed user.
Correct. So actually now, if you go back to the previous slide, so there you go. So we talk about why get a Part 74 license, because it gives you advantages over Part 15 users. Well, let's look at Part 15 and see what your limitations actually are. So when we say Part 15, again, we're back to Code of Federal Regulations, Title 47, Subchapter 1, but this time we're in Subchapter A, Part 15, and Part 15 rules are intentional radiators, in other words, specifically tasked transmitters, but that can operate without a license. And for those of you who are operating Part 15 wireless microphones, you're interested in Subpart C, Section 15.236. And this is a section of the rules that are going to change after July 13. And what's July 13th? That's the end of the 600 megahertz transition period. So if you actually go to the CFR right now and look up the rules as of May 20th, 2020, this is what you're going to see. You're going to see that operation of wireless microphones are, unlicensed wireless microphones are limited to the core TV channels, as well as 614 to 698, because that's still part of the core TV channels. You'll see that your power level limits are limited to that of 50 milliwatts in the core television channels and 20 milliwatts in the 600 megahertz duplex gap. And given that we are now in phase 10, and certainly T-Mobile has fired up in just about every market, that duplex gap is now active, and Part 15 users are limited to 20 milliwatts there. If you look at the definitions as they relate to Part 15 users, you see that the 600 megahertz guard band is defined as 614 to 617, and the 600 megahertz duplex gap is 652 to 663. This is only for the next 2 months. Gary, can you go to the next slide?
There you go.
All right. So now if we look at the next slide, after July 13th, you can see a couple of changes. First of all, your permissible operations above channel 37 is now limited to 614 to 616. 616 and 617 has gone away because that is now a guard band. And 657 to 663. 653 to 657 is reserved for licensed Part 74 users only. So you've lost quite a few meg there in which to operate. Your power levels have remained the same, but you have reduced the amount of spectrum in which you can operate. So these are the primary differences as it relates to equipment that's available right now on the market. Notice that nowhere in Part 15 here does it talk about the 950 STL band and the forthcoming 1.4 gig and 7 gig bands. Wireless microphones will not be permitted to operate there. So these are all the reasons that a Part 74 license benefits wireless microphone professional users and professional providers, especially if you're doing large-scale events where not only do you simply need the channel counts, but where you may also have Part 15 users coming onto or coming in or near the venue or venue grounds for ancillary stages, ancillary demonstrations, ancillary conferences or other presentations that are close enough to your primary stages of interest or areas of interest that they need to be coordinated in. This way it gives them a place to go and it gives you a place to go where arguably an interloper could not reach you. Or if they reach you, they couldn't get to the same power levels that you can operate at. So do you have any questions that?
We do. So let's see. And yeah, when you're talking about 950 meg STL, you're talking about AvTrack band. Those are allowed for Part 74, but not Part 15 was the point, right?
Correct.
Okay, so some of the questions we've got. Ike Zimble is wondering if you are aware of any Part 15 users being cited by the FCC for illegal or improper use.
Well, that's a tricky question. First of all, I'm going to presume he means Part 15 wireless microphone users, not just
He does, yeah.
Global. To my knowledge, no. I haven't really looked, though, at the Enforcement Bureau's notice of violations recently.
Yeah.
But it wouldn't be too long a time to go through that, but I don't believe so.
Nat Korzen is wondering if you know approximately how many Part 74 low power auxiliary licenses there are right now. Is that something that you've looked at with your FCC research?
No, but I would say it's probably well over 12,000 at this point.
Which is great for the visibility of professional users. And then Peter Morrison is wondering if Part 74 license holders are also restricted to 20 milliwatt in the guard band.
Yes. So 614 to 616 and 653 to 650 to 663, even Part 74 license holders are limited to 20 milliwatts.
All right, I think that catches us up.
All right.
So that gets into my part of who is eligible for a Part 74 license. So we start with 74.801. And as we've talked about a little bit, we want to define a low power auxiliary station. So that's an auxiliary station authorized and operated pursuant to the provisions set forth in this subpart. So as we're talking through these definitions, it's important to note when we're saying low power auxiliary station or LPAS, that's what we're talking about. It's authorized, it's a device authorized as low power auxiliary intended to transmit over distances of approximately 100 meters. So wireless microphones, Q control, can also be control communications, synchronization of TV camera signals. So who are these people who are defined in 74.801? And you'll hear us talk a lot about this as we move on through discussions of eligibility. But you want to highlight 4 of them that are, I think, the most common for the people that would be tuning in today. You could be a large venue owner or operator. So you could be a convention center, you could be a performance space, you could be a sports venue of some type, stadium, any large venue owner or operator. And as a large venue owner or operator, one of the things that impacts your eligibility is that you routinely use 50 or more low power auxiliary station devices. So 50 or more total mics, IEMs, maybe wireless intercom. And that you use that for most of the events and the productions that you have there. Another person that could be eligible for a Part 74 license would be a motion picture producer. There's not the requirement here to routinely use 50 or more low power auxiliary devices. You just need to be a person or organization engaged in the production or filming of motion pictures. Professional sound company, I know for the Part 74 licenses that we process at PWS, like the professional sound company is probably the most common for us. So person or organization that provides audio services routinely uses 50 or more devices. And then a television program producer is another one. If you're engaged in producing television programs, could be sports, could be special events, but if you're producing television programs, you qualify or you're eligible to apply for a Part 74 license. And again, notice with motion picture and television producers, there's not that requirement to routinely use 50 or more devices. So once you've determined if you're eligible, you also want to look at the different licensing requirements. I think this part, we're really just listing some of the other less common entities here, but we already covered the numbers 4, 5, 7, and 8 from this list. But also eligible are folks like broadcasters, cable television system operators, a broadcast network entity. So your most common, as we said, large venue owner operator, motion picture producer, professional sound company, and television program producer. And we keep hammering in that point that you need to routinely use 50 or more low power auxiliary station devices if you're a professional sound company or a large venue owner or operator. So Henry's going to talk a little bit about requirements for a license, but let's see if we have any more questions coming in that we want to cover between here and there.
Yeah.
Question I have, go back one slide. For a
Sure.
second. It says large venue owner or operator. Well, they may not be the people that are actually using the equipment. Can they hold the license and their employee be the person who actually uses it? Or does the employee have to have the license?
No. The license can be held by any entity, and then their authorized agent or representative, an employee, absolutely can operate it. It's sort of the same situation as if one has a Part 90 license for two-way radios. The company would hold a license, but each individual employee doesn't have to have one.
So the TV, the movie production company would hold a license, and their audio people would represent them.
That's one scenario, although in the actual workflow, typically most of the sound techs and audio mixers in TV and film own their own kits, and they and their gear are rented or hired for the production. So most of those guys
have to carry the license then.
They own the license. They possess the license.
Right. Mark Kennedy asked, how do you determine if the venue with a Part 74 license? Well, I guess you just ask them, right?
Well, you can go to the FCC ULS, Universal Licensing System, and do a licensee search. So if you know the venue name, if you know the venue's federal FCC registration number, right. If you know the venue's address, there are multiple search terms you can look up to find out if the venue has a license. Although typically the venue name as you know it may not be the legal entity under which the license was obtained. So the name may not match.
Does a television producer have to be, is that commercial television only, or is corporate television fall under that?
Well, if you're talking about corporate television, if you're talking about basically what is closed broadcast only for a local, yeah, you're checking your head, then the initial answer to that is no. Remember that all of these rules came from the perspective that years ago you had broadcasters of television or radio that went out to the general population. So if you're doing a closed broadcast, and really broadcast means over the air, as far as I know, the FCC has not yet changed the definition of broadcast to mean webcasts or something that doesn't go out over the air.
Not even a cable channel doesn't count?
Correct. In fact, if you look in the rules, cable operators are their own subpart. So the words broadcast always means over the air, whether it's radio or TV. So they don't mean anything that is restricted to the web or even closed circuit through fiber, if you're doing a closed circuit through a building. So that's why whenever we talk about broadcast, we really are talking about, anybody over the air, NBC,
Right.
ABC, CBS, your local affiliate station, Fox, whatever.
Right. Okay.
Are any wireless mic manufacturers offering systems that include the above 600 gaps?
Yes, Shure offers STL 950 STL band. Sennheiser offers STL band.
Do you know what those
Audio-Technica.
band names are? Are
The Shure band is generally X5 something, depending on the model line. So it's either X52, X55.
right.
Sennheiser, I do not know what they refer to that band as.
I think they have L band is the Sennheiser, is one of the Sennheiser bands that operates there.
Okay, and then Audio-Technica has a digital unit that operates in 944 to 952. It's got a very limited tuning range, though. I don't remember what they call that, but it's on their website.
Right.
Raven
wants to know how.
Certainly does. That's their band. That's their block 944.
Raven wants to know how strict the 50 or more threshold actually is.
Well, that's a good question. I think at this point it's sort of on the honor system. I certainly am not aware of any even notice of inquiries from FCC going about or asking if somebody was legitimately using 50. I do know that FCC has returned applications for people not including that certification that they routinely use 50. And I haven't heard of anybody the FCC coming back to anybody.
Felipe is asking, when you say routinely, and this is the question I asked before the show, I asked, what is the definition of routinely? I routinely use 50 wireless mics every 10 years. That's
Right.
my routine. What does it mean to the FCC?
Well, they don't define the word routinely explicitly, but if you look in 801, what the closest you get to a definition is routinely using 50 or more low power auxiliary station devices means that the professional sound company or large venue operator or owner uses 50 or more such devices for most events or production. So one would have to presume that as long as you use 50 or more for 55, 60% or more of your productions, you arguably meet the threshold for routinely as the FCC would want to see it.
Yeah, and this is probably a good time to mention that we're definitely not attorneys specializing in communications law.
Exactly.
So if you've got concerns about this and your eligibility, definitely consult your legal counsel before telling the FCC that you learned this on a webinar. But we've got some experience filing some of these things and can.
Well, webinars are the bee's knees, So.
And if you need, we can recommend some excellent telecommunications counsel, people we've been working with for years, who are neck deep in wireless microphone Part 74, Part 73 rules and regulations and proceedings.
And what's magic about that 50 number? Is this just to keep people applying for a license if they have two wireless mics?
Well, I was told that in one of the meetings with FCC that the number just seemed like a good number this is an unofficial explanation, of course, it just seemed like a good number to differentiate professional users from non-professional. And as a threshold to keep the FCC from being inundated with applications from people who don't really understand the process, and not only bogging down the Media Bureau with license applications that are probably going to get returned, but also from creating an environment where you have so many licensed users, you might actually have a database registration that is so full it would preclude the use of white space devices and TV bands altogether.
The as an RF coordinator using equipment from the audio production, I can use my license to cover the equipment I'm using if the production does not have any.
Yes, because you are in theory on site and have immediate command and control over that equipment. So if you saw one of the A2s taking the attenuator off the IFB T1 and retuned it to a T-band channel, you could go over there and shut it down. Or
Particularly if I had handed them the attenuator to put on there in the first place. Exactly.
yes.
That license for the sound company with their representative on site for a festival, maybe of dozens of stages, could cover the entire festival as long as they're the ones running around and coordinating everything, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Matthew points out Shure does offer a band that runs on the B band receivers that is just the guard bands.
Yes. And I believe because that unit does not go higher than 20 milliwatts, it is also Part 15 certified, or is certified under Part 15. So therefore, Part 15 wireless microphone users can legally use that piece of equipment.
So they don't need a Part 74 license.
Not for the guard band. If you're talking about operation in the duplex gap.
Well, I think the B unit will go in both places.
Then if that unit can tune to 653 to 657, I would have to go look at the authorization on that particular piece of equipment, but that means the equipment in theory should only be certified for Part 74 users.
So Ike points out that Rad is probably the only manufacturer that has a firmware update post repack compliant in the guard band and duplex gap, right? Particularly with the change coming up in June.
There are plenty of other manufacturers that have firmware updates. Like Shure's had that out for quite a while to be able to adjust some of their equipment. Rad's definitely one of the manufacturers that's doing that, where you can be compliant with a firmware update.
I will say that, putting on my Rad hat for a moment, we are looking into actually having a couple of different firmware versions, one which will be 100% Part 15 compliant, another which would be Part 74 compliant, and we will actually get 2 certifications. Not on the same, we will get units certified.
Different equipment.
Right, so then if somebody doesn't have a license, we sell them the Part 15 firmware loaded unit.
And how do you market that?
Not sure I understand the question.
What is it labeled? People who are too lazy to get a license and people who get a license?
Well, no, it'll have a different FCC ID number on the back.
But I mean, how do you actually you determine if they have a license when they want to rent it, and then you pick which one ever works for them?
Well, no, this from the manufacturer, from Rad's perspective.
Oh, okay.
When we sell units,
Got it.
Our dealer or the rep will tell us whether he sold a Part 15 unit or a Part 74 unit, and then we will pick the unit with the appropriate firmware on it.
And Mark Kennedy asked, is a wireless belt pack for intercom part of the 50 transmitters? I would say yes.
Yes, anything that has an oscillator, anything that has that oscillator mixer in it, is considered a transmitter. So,
and Mark also asks, do I charge the client for my Part 74 license? No, I charge the client for my RF coordination like I would charge the client for my consultation as a lawyer, because I carry a lawyer's license.
Correct. The license is just one of the
Right.
tools that you have in order to do your job better, or certainly to meet or exceed the client expectation.
Now, maybe I let the clients know that I have it, so they're protected, but it's not a billable item per se.
Correct. It's one more advantage of why the client would hire you over the non-licensed user.
Right. Okay,
Another
we're caught up.
Another question that came up about the 50 channels
Right.
was asking about, do we, when we're saying 50 channels, does it have to be all on one show? Can that be, I use 50 channels deployed on multiple shows? I think people are kind of concerned with the 50 channel number here and eligibility.
So in our discussions with FCC years ago, when this 50 number was being floated around, again, in a meeting that is unofficial, but for the fact that we had to file an ex parte to show that we met with these people, the feeling was that if you are renting 2 wireless microphones out to 25 different users, you've met the threshold. You don't have to have 50 on a single production or at a single venue, but you certainly must be using 50 or more at any given moment that you have wireless microphones deployed on a routine basis. So I would say that it's a safe bet as long as you have 50 microphones or more out in the wild. You meet the spirit, if not the letter, of the regulation.
Kenneth Goodwin asks if I don't have a license, but I'm coordinating a large event with 100 wireless mics, should I get the license? Should the event producer get the license? Should we hire a third-party license owner, or someone should pay me to pursue a license?
Well, who's providing the equipment? Do they have a license?
He didn't say.
Okay. So first of all, you'd want to check with the provider of the equipment to see if they have a license. You as the coordinator don't need a license, but if there's no license holder on that show, then nobody can operate at more than 50 milliwatts in the core TV band, and nobody can operate in the STL band. No one can operate.
Even if they're an employee of the company that is holding the license?
Oh, well, if the company who's providing the equipment holds a license, then yes, you can. Then you can operate as under Part 74.
A little iffy. I mean, if you're working for the producer, technically you're not working for the rental company. So,
but it doesn't matter because again, somebody with a license somebody with a license or the authorized representative of the license holder is on site with the equipment,
right,
therefore has a need, command and control over that equipment. If there is a violation or interference taking place, that person can mandate or go over right to the equipment and shut it down.
Yeah, I think we're talking about kind of the big picture idea that there's licensed users are able to do things that could cause interference more easily than unlicensed users. And so in any of these situations, that command and control aspect and the ability to remedy an interference event is really what we're driving at, right?
Yes, very much so. There's 2 parts to it. Number one is you really must take proper coordination workflow to avoid the possibility of creating interference in the first place. But should an interference event occur, upon the first notice of interference, you must shut down or change channels. You must do something to mitigate that interference as soon as possible once receiving the information of interference, whether it's FCC calling you, whether it's the local SPE calling you, whether it's the fire department showing up at your door saying, hey, we hear, although not likely because of the bandwidth differences, but we're getting interference detection from your theater. Whatever that indication is, you must shut down or change channel.
Ask again, so the 50 number could be based on your owned inventory?
Yes, absolutely. But that,
And, you know,
again, but
it doesn't matter if you own it, if you're getting 5 mics from CP and 45 mics from PWS, it's still there's your 50.
correct. They don't care about the origins of the equipment.
Right.
Yeah, and also I'd say that like the reason that we encourage a lot of these users out there to get a Part 74 license is because they're the people in the field operating this equipment. And so if I am a Part 74 license holder and I'm out operating equipment in the field, I don't have to care if the company that I rented it from has a license because I do, right? So we're talking around these scenarios like, well, what if I don't have a license, but the sound company that's renting it to me does, and then who's in control of the equipment? And I think it's far easier for everyone involved to be covered and be good RF citizens to just say, I as a technician carry a Part 74 license, the sound company I'm renting for carries a Part 74 license. Like we all understand these rules and regulations and know how to operate this equipment in a responsible manner.
Also, because I am a professional, I have a license and I have a spectrum analyzer, and I'm work as a professional. It's part of my job to do that.
Yep.
It's not a nitpicking, well, should you get it? Should you get it? You know, that's the business I'm in.
Again,
Yeah,
it really comes down to command and control over the equipment.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, this comes down to getting, the cost of a license is less than the cost of the IS software, or less than the cost of your spectrum analyzer. And if this is something you're doing on a regular basis as a professional, I think it's just a good thing to encourage everyone to.
And I understand that PWS gives away a free IAS software with every license.
I don't know if
No.
that's.
Oh, darn it.
I'd have to check on that. I don't know if that's within my power to give away, right?
Uh-oh.
Yeah.
Now, intercom systems, digital, like Free Speak, are also under 74, right?
No, they are Part 15.
Okay.
Depending on which Free Speak you have, or Bolero, or
Right.
Pliant Technologies. So if you're looking at Free Speak, which in this country, or Bolero, which operates in the PCS duplex gap, 1.92 to 1.93,
Or Wi-Fi.
or the Wi-Fi band, 2.4.
Right.
Those are both Part 15 services. There is no licensed service to operate in there. But what people
Right.
have to remember, and here's a complete tangent, but what people have to remember about the 1.9 gig band is that is the duplex gap between the uplink and downlink for PCS services. What's the duplex gap? Well, that's where out-of-band emissions go to die. So early on, when PCS systems were being deployed, there was actually a fair amount of out-of-band emissions in 1920 to 1930. And we used to see a lot of that with DAS going into venues. The integrators would just turn the DAS amplifiers up to 11, walk away. And the noise floor in that 10 meg would rise to completely unusable levels. Not much of a problem now, but that is a Part 15. In fact, it is actually called the unlicensed PCS band, and it is enumerated in Part 15.
If I'm out doing a show and my equipment gets interfered with by a white space device and I have not registered with the database, who's at fault?
Well, you're talking about as a Part 74 user?
Right.
Well, the interference to you is your own fault because you did not go out and reserve the channel. However, you do have the right to go over to the white space device operator and tell him to shut down because he's interfering with Part 74.
And in the beginning, there was like a 30-day waiting period for non-licensed people to make a request to the white space. Is that still?
No, that whole thing has now gone away. Unlicensed users are no longer allowed to request permission to request inclusion in the database.
But in reality, if you're getting interfered with, your only recourse is to register right away and hope that their database checks soon to turn it off if you can't find out who's running it.
Yes, that is correct. Worst case scenario, the database won't update for 47 hours and 59 minutes.
Excuse me, producer, we need to pause for a little bit while the internet catches up.
Exactly.
Yeah, I want to cover one quick question we had. I think it was from Robin. Like we had a why can't we cover RF coordinator with this license? And I think you can. An RF coordinator, I would argue, is someone who is using these microphones, or it has command and control of these microphones. And so just because you don't own 100 channels of wireless mics doesn't mean
I don't think
you
it
can't get
says
a
own.
Part 74 license.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Routinely use.
Yeah, and use is certainly a nebulous term. Is who's using it? Well, the equipment owner isn't necessarily using it. His client's using it.
Except that he's asking if that RF coordinator can avoid the routine quantity part of getting their license. No, you have to say you use it over 50 when you apply.
If he's going to be a professional sound company or a large venue owner operator, the internal coordinator for that venue, then he's got to have that certification.
Right.
Yeah.
Attached to that.
Another option, if you're coordinating for, let's say, a sporting event that's on broadcast television, you could apply as a television program producer.
Right. If you do television productions or film, then that minimum of 50 channels does not apply.
So Robin is bringing up the point that almost none of the people he knows who have wireless mics, like theaters and churches, use over 50.
Yes, and that is a point of contention right now. There is a concerted effort, and Sennheiser is leading this right now, about getting that 50 threshold reduced, because there are an abundance of very professional users who just don't rise to that count. Many municipalities who have wireless microphones as part of their hearing rooms.
Right.
Certainly a professional environment, but yet they don't come anywhere near that. So there are proceedings, there are comments to get that reevaluated. Nothing I'd hold my breath on, but it is something that is actively being pursued.
All right, Henry, do you want to talk a little bit about your Part 74 license requirements, if there's any of this that we haven't gone over yet?
I think we're pretty much.
Yeah, we're on, let's see.
Right. So if we go to the next page, I believe, the next slide.
Okay. Next slide.
So to sum up, essentially, what we're talking about is your application must include details about your eligibility. How is it you are eligible? And you need to state this. So if you're a television or motion picture producer, all you need to do is say that you regularly work on the types of events that you do for, name your clientele or name the broadcasters, name the film production companies. This is the generally accepted language that the FCC has been approving. Again, not attorneys, but this is what's been working. If you are a professional sound company or large venue owner operator, and you have that 50 device limitation attached, again, you have to explain what it is you do. You're a professional sound company as defined by 74801, and you hereby certify that you routinely use the 50 or more low power auxiliary stations. Again, this is the language that the FCC has been accepting. If you are a large venue owner or operator, you are, excuse me, you are a fixed location operator. You must include your defined location. That will include your latitude and longitude and your radius of operations. So typically you would want to take a radius that encompasses your property a little bit outside the actual building in case you ever want to do a remote out on the building. If you host award shows and you do red carpets out front, you'll want to make sure that you include the sidewalks, things like that. If you are a multi-complex or multi-building venue with smaller venues across the street from each other or down the block, you can certainly choose a center location and draw a circle that encompasses the whole block or a few of your buildings. Even if they're spread out over several blocks, you could include all of that in one large area of operations if you need. So that pretty much covers requirements. Any other questions regarding requirements at this point that we want to address? I don't think so.
I think we're caught up.
Kevin Parrish makes the comment that routine operations at fixed locations are also only available, protection from white space devices are only available for Part 74 license. So again, this falls under the large venue or the venue owner operator. That license will protect you against white space devices for your defined area of operations on a permanent basis, or unless you define a time of operations. So if you know you're never operating from, let's say, 3 a.m. to 6 a.m., you might want to free that up for the white space devices. Christopher Bouchon, how is an individual eligible? An individual just needs to say that they are a professional. Well, it depends on the kind of work you do. Not a sound company or TV producer. Well, this is something that it's not very well defined in the rules, in that we've not yet seen a prohibition against an individual, even though there's no specific statement about individuals from getting a license. So if you...
How do they word it as in 74.801?
Yeah, I just pulled that slide back up.
Well, this is exactly what you see as far as the wording. Professional sound company refers to a person or organization. So there you go. It actually does say person.
That's the phrase that I used on my application.
Right. So there is your ability as an individual to get a license, presuming you routinely work with 50 or more. So if more than 50, 60% of your shows involve more than 50 wireless microphone type devices, low power auxiliary station, then you are eligible for a license.
We've got a couple of questions about renewals as well. How long does the license last? When you need to renew? What's involved in renewing?
Licenses are now 10 years, I believe, or rather goodbye. And renewal encompasses nothing more than logging in to the ULS, confirming that nothing has changed, or making those permissive changes, an address change, maybe change the quantity of wireless microphones you use to a greater quantity. Or you would have to file an amendment if you wanted to add additional spectrum that you're now using. But renewing is a fairly easy process. You pay your money and you will get an email later on saying that your license has been renewed.
Yeah, and it's 10 years or 8 years, depending on which license you're talking about.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Cameron. So 10 years for professional sound companies and venues, and then TV and motion picture would be 8 years.
Now there's there to use frequencies above 600 in the duplex gap, you need an addition to the license, right? An amendment.
Well, your license must always enumerate those bands in which you have permission to operate.
Right.
So if your current Part 74 license does not have 653 to 657 specifically listed, you are not legally allowed to operate there. It's not a tremendous problem to go back into the ULS and amend your license for that. We'll go through an approval process, and as long as they don't have any other issues with your license, they would probably approve that amendment.
So on my application, there were about 9 different bands that I applied for,
Mm-hmm.
starting at 76, 174, 470, 494, 450, 54 to 72, etc.
Right.
Plus 653 to 657, 657 to 663, 488 to 494. So they were all specified out. Now, in the changes that are coming up in June, do I have to have my license changed because of that 653 band change?
What's going to happen is the licenses will essentially be automatically amended and modified. How long after July 13th? Don't really know, but at some point they will automatically be modified to reflect the loss of that spectrum no longer available to Part 74 users, as well as the new band that Part 74 users have access to that you already had. So for instance, if your license said 614 to 698, your amended license after the fact will say 653 to 657. 614 through 616 is Part 15 band. So your license, you can request that band on your license, but it will probably be bounced back because that's not licensed territory. You can't have any of the advantages of a license. You can't restrict use by non-licensed users there. Same thing with 657 to 663 because it is
614 to 616 did not get bounced back on mine.
Because it's not July 13 yet.
Ah, that's when my birthday is. Good.
Oh boy, you're going to get a hell of a birthday present.
So why are they changing these bands and what's changing in that? Have we covered that yet?
Well, we didn't cover it here, but we certainly covered it in past webinars. These bands are changing due to the 600 megahertz auction. So because 617 through 653 and 663 through 698 are now blocks A through G for LTE services, 616 through 617 is a guard band in which no one is permitted to operate. So the only available spectrum left at that end is 614 to 616, and the FCC decided to make that Part 15. On the other side, 652 to 653 is the guard band. Again, no one is permitted to operate there to protect the PCS. And then because of the campaign by Part 74 users to have some protected spectrum in the guard band being 653 to 663.
Henry, I just threw up a graphic that might help you.
Oh, good. So the license users needed some protection against white space devices in that guard band, mostly for EMG. So 653 to 657 is licensed users only, Part 74 holders. while 657 to 663 again is Part 15 users. So again, this was all brought about by the 600 megahertz auction, and being in the middle of the transition, or towards the end of the transition right now, the rules haven't gone over to post-transition fully yet. You're limited to 20 milliwatts in the guard band because we now have most of the equipment is operating there, although you could, as long as you don't interfere with any Block G or Block A users, you could operate at 250 milliwatts if you have a Part 74 license right now. But come July 13th, 20 milliwatts is your max. Same thing with 616 to 617, 614 to 617.
On a slightly different question, if there are multiple Part 74 licensees on site with a show, is there any priority on who should be in charge and who gets in trouble when you aren't following a rule? Or...
Well, there's no priority legally as far as the FCC is concerned. The priority now is the politics and workflow of the show.
Right.
In theory, there is an event coordinator. If you look back at, well, we haven't gotten there yet. We haven't looked under operating rules yet. But the FCC says that users need to work out interference among themselves. There must be a concerted effort to not interfere with each other and not to have to involve the FCC. That is the purpose of having an event frequency coordinator. We have to let him or her, sorry, let them be the arbiter of frequency assignments. And if we look at operating under Part 74, normal rules of frequency coordination apply. Consult the local or event frequency coordinator.
Right, right.
I'll find exactly where in the rules it says that.
Alan asks, he says, I'm an independent production sound mixer. I do mostly commercial web pieces. I have 6 wireless transmitters that run at 100 milliwatts. Do I need a Part 74? How do I classify myself? I won't have ever 50.
Then, and this is where we get into that, you know, you are at a disadvantage. You certainly are not legally authorized to run 100 milliwatts. And if you don't routinely use 50 devices or more, you're ineligible for the license. So unfortunately, if you're operating in the core TV bands, you are limited to 50 milliwatts and 20 milliwatts everywhere else, as is the Part 74 license holder. So commercial web pieces, no, that is not a movie producer. Remember, FCC has not changed their definition of a broadcaster, and they have not added webcasting to their definitions yet.
I'm not entirely sure they use the internet yet, but that's okay.
No, they do. In fact, their ULS parts Form 601 finally came into the 21st century.
There we go.
About 16 or 17 months ago. To several of our joyous moments.
Ike wants to know, I don't have STL band on my license. Should I get that added?
That depends. Is he talking about his ICS license or his
No.
FCC license?
It's
Yeah.
FCC
Yes.
license, yeah.
Yes. Should definitely get, especially since the kind of work Ike does, he should
Right.
absolutely get 944 to 960 added to his license.
Does CP have wireless in that band?
Oh yes, CP has
Yeah.
a ton of wireless in the 941 to 960. We gave Shore a very good couple of quarters of revenue on that note. And we also have 1.4 gig wireless microphones at CP.
Kevin Parrish points out that in the case of multiple coordinators on site, the event takes priority and the pesky news crews go to the back of the bus.
Yes, very much so. I mean, obviously, the event is the reason for everyone being there. So you really have to protect the production elements first and foremost. Whether it's a sporting event, whether it's a political convention, whether it's a debate, whether it's a television show, the event itself must be protected first and foremost, and with decreasing priority as to the purpose of running wireless devices for that event. So obviously the wireless microphones for the key people who are presenting the event, the intercom, the wireless intercom, if you're running in UHF or VHF or STL band, that is running the production, those will absolutely have priority. Arguably, the next priority down would be the rights holders. So in the case of sports television, that's the broadcaster who's actually going to be broadcasting the game. So if you're watching Super Bowl on CBS or you're watching a NASCAR race on Fox, the broadcasting rights holder would have the next tier down as far as rights. And then after that, as Kevin so aptly called it, those pesky ENG crews and ancillary wireless needs to the productions, such as, you know, if Facebook comes in or some other secondary contributor to the event that may be setting up an information booth or wants to do a small little presentation that doesn't really have anything to do with the event itself, but is promoting something in adjunct to the event, those people would be getting a tertiary priority.
The 20 milliwatt limit, is that for everybody, including the people with a license?
Correct. In Part 74, in the duplex gap and the 600 megahertz guard band, that is correct.
And about the if you're in the regular TV bands, the
Then
current TV band,
Part 15 users are limited to 50 milliwatts in TV bands.
right? And same with VHF?
Correct. Well, even Part 74 users are limited to 50 milliwatts in VHF.
Okay.
I think we're close to caught up. If you want to talk a little bit about operating on top of DTV.
Yeah, definitely.
Sure. So, can you operate on top of a DTV station? Well, the first question is, do you want to? If the DTV station is strong enough at your location, obviously there's no point to even broaching this subject because it's an unusable station. But what about those TV channels where the TV station is weak enough, especially inside a venue, but yet the venue is still within the defined service contour of the TV station? Well, the rules state that under normal circumstances, you are not permitted to operate within the service contour of a TV station. And in fact, you must maintain a distance outside the service contour so that your area of operation does not get into the TV station's service contour. And that's covered under 802. And I don't think we have that listed here, but I believe you have to remain 80 kilometers from the service contour. However, the FCC recognized for years that that was not the reality, that users would routinely operate within the service contours of those DTV stations whose signal was so weak at the venue that it was not an interference issue either to the wireless microphones or to anybody who's potentially trying to watch that TV station. And how often do you have TV reception inside a performance venue? So what the FCC permitted was if you are inside a venue and the signal level from that DTV broadcaster was not greater than minus 84 dBm across the 6 megahertz wide TV channel, then you could operate wireless microphones there. But only Part 74 licensed users have this luxury. Part 15 users can't be closer than 80 kilometers from the service contour of an active DTV station, even if that TV station is so weak inside the venue, it's a completely usable channel.
That alone is worth it to get the license right there.
Absolutely. And I think every coordinator of a large scale event will tell you that when the ENG crews show up, even though many of them are probably licensed, or certainly when these ancillary users show up who don't have licenses but are sort of an adjunct to the event, the first place we stick them is on top of active DTV stations, because their transmitters are typically so close to the receivers that they can maintain a proper SNR, CNR to have perfectly good performance. But operating a production level wireless device in a TV channel that's very weak, being able to do that legally now is a tremendous advantage. So that's how you can now legally operate within the service contour of a active DTV station, which Part 15 users cannot do.
Is the sound technician operating less than 50 devices, but working in the production of a television program over broadcast television? Do they qualify under the television program producer?
Yes, if the bulk of your work is for the content creation of a show that was designed to be broadcast either live or later on, or for production as a feature film or other movie, even if it's for TV.
Like a sporting event like Super Bowl or something like that?
Absolutely, or even if it's a regional high school football team that may be broadcast on the local regional TV channel.
Now, if you're
it's broadcast.
If you're working for the production company doing the halftime show on the Super Bowl and not for the television station, NBC, let's say, can you still do it under the broadcast license because your product is going to TV?
Well, the halftime show is being broadcast.
Right.
At that point, your operations can be covered under two different auspices. One would certainly be the broadcaster and their Part 74 license, which is, by the way, is as an extension of their Part 73 license. Or in the case of Super Bowl, you can operate under the NFL's Part 74 license.
If you're selling a wireless device, do you have to make sure the person you're selling it to has a license if you're selling a 100 milliwatt wireless device, or it's not like a gun, it's up to the buyer to use it properly?
Well, yes and no. So here's a little bit of a dilemma which really affects the manufacturers. The manufacturers have some rather strict marketing rules that they have to abide by. And one of the things that the OEMs got their hand slapped for back at the beginning of the push for increasing eligibility for Part 74 and white space devices first coming in was that they were just selling this equipment to anybody. And that's how we ended up with a huge number of unlicensed users. So the manufacturers have an implicit duty to make sure that only licensed users are using equipment certificated under Part 74. The only way manufacturers really have to do that is through their dealers and their sales reps. So certainly the more reputable manufacturers are telling their dealers and reps that if somebody comes in and asks for 100 milliwatt capable, 250 milliwatt capable product or STL capable product, they have to do due diligence to make sure that the buyer has a Part 74 license or has applied for one, I guess. Again, I'm not an attorney and I'm certainly not speaking for any of the OEMs, but this has been the general theme of discussions that I've seen in proceedings and that I've heard at FCC meetings I've accompanied with the OEMs. But if you want to really get firsthand knowledge, then I would suggest you talk to the OEMs directly to get their policy on the matter.
It seems as if this 50-channel wireless thing is like throwing up a huge red flag for everybody. Matt is asking, how do you prove that your jobs have 50 wireless? Do you have to provide all the jobs on a frequency list? Who's checking up on me?
Well, no, you don't have to prove anything. When you submit your application, you are submitting a statement which states that you certify that you are routinely using 50 or more. Now, that has very significant legal implications. You are certifying on a federal document. Lying on a federal document carries severe consequences. For those of you who don't actually recall, Martha Stewart did not go to jail for insider trading. She went to jail for lying to federal authorities and signing a statement that was incorrect, that was not accurate. So if the FCC wanted to come after you and they could show with reasonable belief that you were not using 50 wireless microphones, and you knew that at the time you certified that statement and applied it, they could refer you to prosecution for a federal crime of lying on a federal form. Now, will the FCC follow up to see if you're actually using 50? I don't know. I can't speak for the Enforcement Bureau. I can tell you in the most general and unofficial terms that the FCC is a complaint-driven agency. They're not going to take action for the most part unless they get a complaint. And unfortunately, to the chagrin of many license holders, the Enforcement Bureau has seen tremendous budgetary and personnel cuts over the years. And they have to concentrate their efforts on life safety instance of interference and to those services which provide very large public usage, i.e. cellular phone, LTE, PCS services, and broadcast services. Would you ever get caught? Probably not, but don't lie on a federal form. So all I can advise you is don't lie.
Yeah, I mean, we're kind of getting back to that good RF citizen thing again, where we're recommending that people follow the rules and try and operate all of these systems legally. And in some cases, as you mentioned, Henry, like the FCC rules are potentially out of date, not considering webcasting as broadcasting, or setting a 50 channel limit based on somebody thinking, well, that's the general dividing line between a professional and a non-professional user, and that may not be true for everybody, right? But we're encouraging people to understand the rules and try and operate within them.
Absolutely. Being a licensed anything, whether you are a licensed vehicle operator, whether you're a licensed heavy machine operator, a licensed gun owner, a pyrotechnician. These are all, in theory, showing that you have a proficiency of workflows around the stated rules and regulations, and this is no different.
One of the things Kevin Parrish points out is that it's extremely important to go out, if you're eligible for a license, to go out and get it. We as a community need to show the FCC what kind of RF usage is out there so that we get some kind of voice with them. They're looking, other people are dying to sell off the rest of the TV band.
Oh, absolutely.
And until we can show that there's people actually using it, i.e. people that are licensed, we're not going to have much of a voice.
Absolutely, and that was one of the points we very much pointed out in one of the earlier slides about why get a Part 74 license. It just increases the visibility of how much we use this spectrum, of how many users there are, and how important this type of use of the spectrum is to content creation. We need the spectrum for content creation as much as everyone else needs it for content distribution. And if we don't show that there are huge numbers of people out there, huge numbers of licensed, knowledgeable, professional users, as Kevin points out, it's just going to add fodder to the argument that the spectrum's underutilized. And we're just going to need more of it.
Your walkie-talkie counts toward your 50 transmitter, or is that all Part 15?
No, walkie-talkies are Part 90, and they have nothing to do with Part 74 whatsoever.
They don't count, okay. And is there any advantage if I am a full-time staff member with a company that has a Part 74 license for me getting one, other than making it look like there's more people that have Part 74 licenses and being a responsible person for our community? Yes, there is a reason for you to get the license.
What Pete said. From a legal perspective of you operating the wireless microphones, if your company has it and you are a full-time employee, which therefore means you are an authorized agent representative, no, there's no advantage to you or your company. If, however, at some point you want to go out on your own or you do freelance when your company is not employing you, having a Part 74 license is absolutely advantageous for you. And again, getting back to Kevin Parrish's point, the more licenses, the more professionals we're showing out there who are actually using the spectrum.
There's one question here about transmitters or channels and the distinction there. Really, for like an Axient digital quadversity was the example given. And I think maybe they're talking about frequency diversity here.
Quadversity would have nothing to do with it, because that's
quadversity is just receive antennas. But if they're talking about frequency diversity, then your transmit channel count I think would in our interpretation, this would mean that microphone is 2 transmitters.
If I were the FCC, I might argue that point because it's a singular device, and when you power it off, both transmitters go off.
Well, what if it's 2 belt packs on a single lav mic?
There you go. Then I would argue then I would agree with you that is 2
right.
2 transmitters. So, if you're talking about a frequency diversity handheld, I think we're splitting hairs there.
Yeah.
And I would argue that certainly anybody who owns ADX2 FDs probably rises to the professional level that they likely either own and deploy 50 wireless microphones on a regular basis, or they are a frequency coordinator or participant in some kind of an event that is utilizing more than 50 wireless microphones on a regular basis.
Yeah, and there's a question here just to clarify when we're talking that, again, that there's a lot of questions about how do I get to this number of 50? You can count microphones, you can count in your monitors, you could count a wireless intercom system like the RAD that operates in the TV band. All of those.
And by the way, if you're looking at RAD and the older style BTR, each belt pack can go to account and the base station can go to account. Again, can you count 2 transmitters in a base station? I think if the 1 or 2 base stations are going to be the deciding factor, if you hit your 50 threshold, I think you're close enough that no one is really going to argue the point, but I could be wrong. And then James Wilkins asked, do you need a lawyer to do this process? No, you can absolutely go to ULS and fill it out yourself. I will tell you, however, that one of the reasons that we've decided not to go through this process with you on the 601 form is there are trick questions and you have to know how to answer them based on who you are and what you do. There's a lot of variables. You certainly need someone who is knowledgeable and experienced to file the 601. Is there a test? No. A test maybe of sanity and endurance, but not.
And I'm throwing up some helpful links here that if you're downloading the slide deck, you'll have this. So there is a instruction form on how to fill out FCC Form 601. There is a website you can go to get your FCC registration number. And then there's the license manager login if you decide you want to tackle this yourself. And then down on the bottom, we've got some links to CP and PWS who offer some services here as well.
There is a YouTube video that's over 10 years old that was actually filled out live during, I think, NAB or AES. And I'm sure the form has changed since then, but it'll just give you an idea of the problem because they do discuss all the problems and pitfalls that you run into.
We even talked about including there's an IATSE, is IATSE 695 maybe, it's out in California, that has an entire step-by-step for doing your Part 74 application list. They've got that on the web, but as Henry said, the web form has changed. And so the information out there is using the old FCC Java site. And so some of that doesn't match up exactly with the new system.
Yeah, it would be good to review just so you can get an idea of what you're tackling, and then you can make the decisions whether you want to try tackling it yourself or hire someone to do it.
Yeah. So Henry, one of the slides we haven't gotten to yet, but we've talked about it a bit in other areas, is your discussion on T-Band, land mobile radio. Do you want to look at this for a second just to touch on any of these points that we might not have hit so far?
I think we hit on all of these points prior, but it doesn't hurt to reinforce this, especially since I see a lot of people, especially Part 15 users, who don't really understand T-Band, and they think because they can't hear anything and they don't see a DTV station in there, they think it's a perfectly good place to operate it. And I want to reinforce, we want to reinforce why you really need to avoid allocated T-band channels for LMR. And the important point to remember is that T-band in those markets is defined as 470 to 512, TV channels 14 to 20. That doesn't mean all 7 of those channels are allocated to public safety land mobile radio. It simply means that any of those channels are part of the pool that could be assigned. However, the FCC has in 90.303, thank you, Cameron, has enumerated the markets and what TV channels are allocated to public safety and non-public safety land mobile radio in each of those markets. And those are the channels you have to avoid. You don't need to avoid 14 through 20. You just need to avoid those allocated channels. for example, in New York City, public safety operates on 14, 15, and 16, and that's the E88 band split, 88 for BTR users. However, 17 and 19 also have private land mobile radio. You don't have to avoid 17 and 19, other than for the fact you'll probably get interfered with. However, they're a licensed service, so if you interfere with one of those receive sites and you get a complaint, you have to shut down. With 14, 15, and 16, in the case of New York City, those are the public safety channels. They are very crowded. There are frequencies, licensed frequencies, every 25 kilohertz, and in some cases, every 12.5 kilohertz. And now there are some interstitial frequencies, every 6.25 kilohertz. Given that a wireless microphone has an occupied channel bandwidth of about 100 kilohertz and a channel designation of 200 kilohertz, there's no way you can avoid not landing on several land mobile radio active frequencies. And that's why we're telling you avoid active land mobile radio channels with public safety in them.
Yeah, I just pulled up a slide from the old presentation showing the T-band channels for folks that want a little more info here.
Perfect. From the interference point of view, your interference is going to occur from both the downlinks, the base stations, they can operate at hundreds of watts, and from handhelds, they can be 3 watts. And they're narrow band, so they actually generate a fair amount of energy in a narrow band, which means they raise the noise floor significantly surrounding them by a couple of hundred kilohertz. So you will see that if somebody keys up a handheld, even right outside your theater. And lastly, as I said earlier, it is possible for your in-ear monitor, your IFB, even your bell pack transmitter, handheld transmitter, interfere with a land mobile radio receive site. You could have your transmitter close enough, or a receive site could be close enough to your venue or your area of operation that you could possibly desense that receive site. And then somebody, an EMS or fire or police trying to call in from a distance away to that receive site could actually have his signal broken up. So you could actually be creating a life safety danger to a first responder. So in short, don't transmit, don't operate within an active land mobile radio public safety TV channel. That is the best and the most prudent course of action.
Absolutely. So we've got a few more questions coming in. Another one talking about freelance techs and getting a Part 74, depending on if you're working for a Part 74 license holder. I feel like we maybe covered this, but can you just reiterate, like for a freelance tech working for a company that holds a license, what's the, should they get a license, should they not?
Well, you don't need one if you are employed by a Part 74 license holder. It can't hurt to get one for yourself. It gives you, in my opinion, it gives you greater marketability. It shows that you are a professional. And again, it just reinforces to the FCC and to others looking to take yet more spectrum away that there are significant numbers of licensees who are incumbents in this band.
We had one more question come in about sound mixer for film and talking about channel counts, but I think we want to reiterate that if you're working on as a motion picture producer, there is not the 50 channel count requirement.
No, because it's based on the number of transmitters, not the number of receivers. But if you work for motion pictures, you are not subject to that 50 count. Remember, you only need to certify the 50 or more routine usage if you are a large venue owner operator or a professional sound company. motion picture producers and television program producers are not subject to that stipulation.
Another question about T-band radio. Essentially, what is it going to look like on a scanner? Like if you have an RF Explorer or a TTI, if you go to do a scan, will we see it? Will we not see it? I think obviously being pushed to transmit in some cases, what's that look like? And maybe talk a little bit about peak hold.
Yeah, so first, let me say it's going to depend on the quality of the device you have. In other words, the number of data points it's going to, it has, and your span. So if what you're normally looking for is a DTV station, which is 6 meg wide, and you want to look at, let's say, 10 channels because it happens to be a nice even 60 megahertz wide, and you have a unit that doesn't have a lot of data points, like an RF Explorer, the odds of you seeing a 12.5 kilohertz or even a 25 kilohertz wide carrier is pretty nil. Peak hold will definitely give you a fighting chance. However, if you are in a known T-band market, you should definitely be looking at your 14 through 20. And you should probably use the highest resolution bandwidth. Set your unit to, or the lowest resolution bandwidth, the highest resolution, but the lowest number. Set to peak hold. And at that point, you will then capture these narrow band transmissions. Now, what you will notice is a pattern. You will see lots of strong carriers in the bottom 3 meg of the channel, the first 3 meg of the channel, and very, very, very few weaker carriers in the upper meg of the channel. That is because Part 90, which is two-way radios and covers T-band for the LMR community, mandates that the bottom 3 meg is used for outbounds. That's the base station transmit. That's the repeater transmit. And the upper 3 meg is the inbound. That's the portable or the mobiles transmit. So you're always going to see stronger signals in that first 3 meg, because those are the base stations. That's the high powered, which is probably at a much higher duty cycle since it's constantly responding to portables or mobiles calling in. The upper 3 meg, conversely, is only going to show you those mobiles or portables that are in range of your spectrum analyzer antenna. And that may not be very many people. It may only be a dozen, half a dozen users at any given moment. And they may not necessarily be talking into the base station. So you may only see an occasional weak transmission, which is why peak hold is so important. But
now for folks that aren't land mobile radio people, when you're talking about portables versus mobiles, you're talking about a portable being the kind of thing you put on your belt and a mobile being the type of thing that you're going to install in maybe like a police car?
Correct. Thank you for that clarification. Yes, so a mobile is the device that would be installed in a vehicle and generally needs an external power source, whereas the portable is that which one would consider as a walkie-talkie or a handy-talkie. So
this spreadsheet you're looking at right now, Kevin also just sent it to me. It is in the handout section if you want to download it.
okay, so yes, in the net and here's why you just simply need to avoid the T-band channels, because in the case of the New York metro area, the New York metro area is more than just New York City and the 5 boroughs that make up New York City. So whereas New York City has public safety in 14, 15, and 16, and Howard Fine also noted this, when you get out the New York City area and you get into some of the surrounding counties, in the case of New York State, you get into Nassau and Suffolk, and then when you go into Bergen County in New Jersey, Raritan County, I believe, and some of the other counties, They also have public safety and T-band because they're part of the New York metro area, and that area has sort of creeped out over the years by permission of the FCC. They don't use 14, 15, and 16 because NYPD, NYFD, FDNY, and EMS have taken up that. They're using channels 17 and 19 to a large degree. So you really have to pay attention to the market that you're in as to where that public safety channels are when you're in a T-band market. LA County is very tricky like that as well. And if you have any questions about the LA market, the SBE coordinator there, Howard Fine, very knowledgeable, and is ready to answer any inquiry with regards to channel usage and coordination.
And when we're saying channels, a couple of questions that come, it's frequencies. Don't say channels because that confuses the hardware.
Well, yes, you are correct.
Frequency is the number.
Well, I'm sort of confusing the point myself, and I should not. So when we're talking about T-band channels, we are actually talking about TV channels, and that's what the T stands for, TV. So when I say avoid, just simply avoid
Right.
T-band channel that has public safety, I'm actually talking about avoiding that television channel, that 6 meg wide channel that contains T-band. Once we're now talking about a wireless microphone channel, then yes, we're talking about a wireless microphone frequency.
And it's only the transmitted frequencies that count. Just because you have 50 receivers doesn't get you over the 50 count.
Correct. For professional sound companies and venues who need to meet that 50 channel count, it's transmitters.
Okay,
Raven points out in the DFW market, you can't do 50 wireless mics. It's just impossible, particularly if you're outdoors, I'm sure.
Well,
That
but
alone,
again, because we're not talking about, it doesn't have to be 50 deployed at a single event, single venue. It could be if you're a company, and you have 10 or 15 rental packages out at different venues, they're probably all going to be using overlapping, if not identical frequencies. So there you can meet your 50 channels there.
doesn't have to be 50 working in the same place.
Correct.
Right.
Okay, well, it's coming up on 2 o'clock Eastern. Did you want to talk about admissions designators or just leave that information in the slides for them?
I'll do a quick overview of emissions designators since lots of people, since people hear about that. So you've probably heard the term emissions designator. What is that? Well, we talk about FM, we talk about AM, we talk about digital emissions, digital wireless microphones, we talk about COFDM, we talk about QPSK. All of these are types of RF transmission schemes, and the FCC calls them emissions because they're emitting radiation, but in what pattern, what kind of spectral density, what's the characteristics behind that RF emission from the device. So the FCC has an emissions designator, which they will assign to the device, actually to a large extent the TCB. The certified testing lab assigns the designator to the device based on the criteria the FCC has. So if you look at an emissions designator, for example, 183 KD1E, the first 3 numbers is the bandwidth, generally the 90% energy occupation of the channel. And what this is saying is 183 kilohertz is the primary channel energy occupation for this device. It's going to eat up 183 kilohertz. Now, what you might also sometimes see is if you look down under decoder and other emissions designators, if you look to the 4th one down, you'll see 25K0. That means 25.0 kilohertz. So for those devices such as land mobile radio, which are 12.5 kilohertz designation, which are occupied 12.5, their designation will actually be 11K3, 11 kilohertz, 11.3 kilohertz. The D is the type of modulation. There's a lot of different types, but what we will typically see is D or F. D for digital, loosely given as angle modulated, or F for FM. And you will see some others. You'll see W, you'll see I believe, all for different kinds of emissions designation, for different kinds of the carrier types, or the modulation types.
How, as a licensee, do we use all these designators? What's the purpose of knowing what they are?
Well, in your license, you're going to be limited based on what you put down in your application to the types of emissions designators.
So you have to list the type of emission designator for the typical wireless mic you might be using or device.
Correct. So 5 years ago, well, actually maybe a little longer. Let's go back pre-ULXDE and even pre-ZAXCOM. You probably would have only ever entered 200 KF3E, which is for your standard FM wideband transmission.
Right.
But with the advent of digital wireless microphones, you're now going to have a slightly narrower modulation width, and you're going to have a D for digital. And then depending on, right, but then a type, depending on the type of modulation, the type of transmission scheme that the manufacturer has suggested, that's going to determine whether it's a 1E, a 1W, a 3E, a 7E.
Right.
That's all part of the manufacturer's secret sauce.
We had a question from Marlo about somebody in Cleveland to assist in his Part 74 applications. Well, both of you don't have to be in Cleveland to help him with that application.
Correct. Anybody who is knowledgeable about
Right.
filing the applications can assist. If he wants somebody in Cleveland whose shoulder to look over, I offhand don't know of anybody.
Where does the hybrid electro land in the emission designator?
It's still considered an FM device because
It's not digital transmission, it's
not
analog.
a digital, correct.
Right.
It's an analog transmission. And I believe they still list their emissions as a 200 kilohertz. I don't recall off the top of my head.
Great.
You can always go, if you look in the middle of that page, you can look up the emissions designator. So you can go to that page and you can enter in the FCC ID number, or if you don't know the FCC ID number, you can enter in there you go. You can enter the applicant's name, that would be the OEM, and then put in the rough frequency range that the unit operates in. Make sure you uncheck the mark that says exact match for frequency range. And then it will return all of the products that the manufacturer has submitted within that time frame. Or I might hint that if you go down where it says show X results, you choose 100 instead of 10. Otherwise, you have to page through a lot of things. Yeah, so now you have page after page after page. So I believe the digital hybrid stuff came into being after 2004. So you may want to do a date search.
Sure, I think we just want to give them an example of what you can search for in here, and then if you found a particular mic, you can look up the emissions designator in there. I can pick one.
Right.
From
find something after 2000, early 2000s.
Okay.
Just to anything in the teens would definitely be the new hybrid. I think. Carl, if you're watching, when was the first year of hybrid? No, actually, back up.
Okay.
Go to View Grant, which is the one with the little check mark. Yeah,
This
that
guy.
one. Yeah, View Grant. So if that is in fact a DBMZT, yeah. So you can see that the emissions designator all the way over on the right is G7E. So that is a, that I believe is still an analog, but it's with,
This is the one for their digital IEMs.
oh, it is? Then G
Yeah.
is digital, okay.
Yep. But just as an example of how you could look up a piece of equipment if you weren't sure what the emissions designator was.
Now here's some, go find the IFB 4T. So if you go back to the search page.
Yeah.
Perform search again.
Okay.
Or go back, I guess, either one.
Sure.
No, go back to the, I don't think you're gonna see the IFB 4T there.
All right. Is there anything we want to add in our search here?
Yeah, so go up under, right above there, under the product code, just put IFBT. Right.
Okay.
And just look for T4.
T4E and T4L.
Go for E.
This one.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, do you notice under the grant notes, it says M4? And
Yeah.
it says FCC rules parts 74. So the important part is that last sentence underneath, which says,
Operation of this unit is limited to use at stations licensed for use under Part 74 of FCC rules.
there you go. So that means only Part 74 users are legally allowed to operate Electrosonics IFB T4 and T1. T4 and T2, T1. Because that's fixed to 250 milliwatts as well. Transmitters. The T2 was the 50 milliwatt bell pack transmitter, I believe. So that's how you can look up a emissions designator for all the equipment that you think you might ever possibly deal with. That is Part 74 certified, or that you might be running up against. And I think that kind of brings us to the end.
Yeah.
Kevin has added a couple more files to your handouts folder, a couple of different examples of the T-Band data information, plus the low power licenses list as of the current time right now.
Oh, okay.
Those. And there were several questions about RF venue. Well, coincidentally enough, on Friday, May 29th, Chris Regan is going to be here to do a webinar on RF venue antennas and RF systems, mostly around how you can use special antennas to fix special little issues. But we certainly asked him about about the different little spectrum analyzers and their new rack mount analyzer as well.
Mm-hmm.
Friday, for all of you kids, we have a show called Legos That Light Up, or LED screens for the rest of us. Beth Forbes is a production manager at Corporate Event TD. She's going to talk about all the technology in making a video spectrum that can work in weird shaped screens and all that sort of stuff. It's going to be a lot of fun. We've always done audio and RF and intercom. Well, I'm glad to be getting a little bit into the lighting we did with
John
Beth.
Featherstone.
John Featherstone, exactly. And then on Wednesday, May 27th, a week from today, Sony's going to talk about their DWX digital series, which are basically, I hate to say this about Sony, but they're like Axiom Digital in that they're all remote controllable digital devices. And they're really clever wireless mics. So we got a bunch of stuff coming up. And then on June 1, we have a very big show on esports audio, mixing for esports audio, mixing your PA, mixing your TV mix, doing 3 separate streams at the same time. Dante system with 25 different devices in it, including 10 announcer panels from Studio Technology. We got tons of great shows coming up.
And I'm sure Pete will leave this screen open for about 5 minutes after we end,
if I have to,
so that everyone can add suggestions for things they'd like to see in the future.
Yeah, definitely. If you think of anything, some of these shows we actually got the idea from the list at the end of the show. So if you think of something you want to do, and it doesn't have to be audio or RF or Part 74, we had a couple of requests for rigging. So we're looking for somebody to do some rigging, although rigging is a little hard because how do you talk about hanging something without actually hanging something? But we can say, okay, if you don't hang it right, it'll fall down. I guess that's all I can say. But I have one of the first persons I get friendly with on a site is the rigger, because they're basically going to run everything, as it were. So it had a great show here. Thank you very much, Gary and Henry, for putting this together. I know this has been a very dense presentation, as it were, because it's a lot of words and numbers and different things, and who knows.
That's
But
okay.
if you don't know, call Henry and Gary, and they'll tell you.
Yeah, this size, it might be so.
Well, thank you for having us, guys. It's really
Yeah, thanks, guys.
Not a problem. Not a problem. Okay, see you all later. I'm going to leave this thing going, so just turn off your cameras and mics, and people can add lots of suggestions. See you all later. Bye-bye.